Hello, biological anthropology lecture students from both Napa Valley College and Diablo Valley College. I'm hoping that the breaks between your college are beginning to align now. They're coming together because one week DVC was on break, another week NVC is on break, and they're a week apart. So I've just kept going with the lecture spectrum through this. And whenever you get back, from your break, just join in where you left off and continue marching through. But I think just about right now, you should both sort of be on the same track again. So now in this last little video mini sort of discussion for the week, I'm going to look back on what you've gone through and what you've looked at in the last couple of days. Okay. So we began by looking at the PowerPoint with sound lecture I put up there. And that was looking at the evolutionary sequence, the generalized and rough, very simplified evolutionary sequence of primates from roughly the middle Eocene down to the Pliocene. And now we've got to get ready for moving from the Pliocene into the Pleistocene, all the way on up into the Holocene until we reach modern humans, right? So let's end this discussion, or sort of continue the discussion that the film, Becoming Human First Steps, left off with. Now, I hope you've answered the study questions because that'll make this much easier to sort of hone in on what I'm trying to talk about here. Now, let's consider the genus Australopithecine, right? The one that begins to emerge around 3.9 to 4 million years ago, and that is around to about 2.5 million years ago, right? We're not going to focus on the previous genus, which were discussed in the film, like Ardipithecus, Sahelanthropus, and Aurora tenonensis. Those are the ones that are, 4 million years back to the 6.5 million part, that real super early part. We're not going to worry too much about that. We want to stay right within the Australopithecine line here, as they're very interesting. Um, um, so the film sort of describes, this bipedal ape standing up, after the Ardipithecines were sort of living in these closed canopied forests, right? These woodlands. The climate begins to change in Africa, particularly in East Africa and South Africa. And what happens is we get advancing savannas, opening savannas, fewer trees. And yes, Australopiths are moving out into open savannas, and these are very hostile places. I mean, the major carnivores in which you see in Africa today were well in place by that time. And not even the big carnivores, even the vicious scavenger semi-carnivores like the hyenas. And this would be one of the most hostile places in the world to actually dwell. And for a creature which makes its living by trying to move across open spaces to getting quote to the next fruit patches or food sources, it's a touch and go sort of lifestyle. In fact, in the fossil record, what we find is almost no Australopiths. They're among the rarest of all fossils in Africa, which tells us it's not for any other factor other than just the frequency. The actual proportion of Australopith, this early genus, is very small. We're barely making it through. This getting on the ground thing on two legs makes us extremely slow and vulnerable to predation. All right, so consider this. Now, next, in the film, they're sort of portraying these Australopiths is very much the intellectual equivalent of a chimpanzee. But be very careful of that. They may look like chimps, and we can brand that they look like chimps. But when you really think about it, or look and measure the actual cranial capacity, they're different. A chimpanzee's cranial capacity, that means the cranial capacity inside the skull, is about 360 to 370 cubic centimeters. I mean, you can take a centimeter cubes, right? And put 360 or 70 inside the skull. Now, with Australopiths, the early Australopiths, we're at 410, and by late Australopiths are maybe at 430 to 440. That's a 15 to 20% increase in cranial capacity. These aren't chimps intellectually, absolutely not. And it's not just the cranial capacity that tells us, it's two other things. Now, for a long time, people thought they were chimps, and here's the reason. In the 1960s, there was a researcher by the name of Louis Leakey. He's the grand poobah of physical anthropology. Discovered a species, and he called it habilis. And habilis was dated at about 2.4 million years of age, and habilis had a slightly less prognathic face, had a slightly larger cranial capacity than your average Australopith, maybe 500 cubic centimeters, and it was in possession of a very small stone tool. But when I say stone tool, I mean just a rock in which was broken to leave some sort of sharp edge. It hasn't been worked extensively, not on both sides, but just some broken rock that was used to scrape or cut. And that's why I call it habilis, which means sort of handyman. And not only did he name it habilis, he placed it as the first member of our genus because it was an association of that stone tool. All right. So this made it look like this creature was so much more superior than these Australopiths who must have been just like chimps. Well, here's the thing, is that years later, this sort of sparked so much active field work in Africa, that find. So many anthropologists were down there, they started discovering Australopiths, which were also in association with stone tools. Now, this changes things. We can't look at these Australopiths as being just, quote, chimpanzee-minded individuals. While the stone tool in itself doesn't guarantee ourselves a high level of sophistication, something else does, and it's this consideration. How is something that's 3.5 feet tall, is walking primarily on 2 legs, right, in the open savannas of Africa, where the most vicious predators in the world are at, surviving? We know the numbers are low, but why were they not driven to extinction? Well, we have to think about 15 to 20% cranial capacity. It wasn't purely for the technical skills, right, the intellectual skills. They were also for certain types of social skills. And I'm going to place an emotion in the social skills bracket because we don't think about it as emotions actually being skills. They allow us to do things that we're not aware of. For example, now you've looked at Thai chimps in the rainforest. Looked at the article and realize how they're very intelligent and stuff. But I'm going to give you a scenario. This would be true of chimpanzees. Now imagine that you have 2 chimpanzees sitting on a branch. They're up high, and there's Joe and there's Mike. Okay, Mike decides to get off that branch and go down to the forest floor. Suddenly, Mike is attacked by a jaguar, and Joe's up there going, "Oh my God, Mike, run away!" Well, you know what? Poor Mike, he's alone because Joe is not going to get off that branch to help him. Joe will be all upset, yell and scream, but he's not going to go down there. What happens is capacity for empathy isn't as well developed as it is ours, not nearly as well developed as ours. And that is one of our strengths. And that is the actual definition of humanity, right? The ability to care for others. And it's actually associated with mental, new sort of apparatuses, biological hardware, which we've just identified for the last few years. And we're going to be actually looking at these sort of neurons, what we call mirror neurons, how they allow us to place ourselves in another person's position. We see ourselves in others, so when others suffers, it's just like us suffering too, so we come to their rescue. And you can see that in any day people do good deeds, and particularly in firemen who rush into burning buildings to save people. Not for the $80,000 a year they get, but because they realize other people are suffering too. Now imagine how this skill, this emotional skill, would play out for early Australopiths in the open savanna. When one of their members might be being attacked by, say, vicious hyenas. And instead of the other groups just fleeing and leaving, the other groups can utilize their arms as weapons and picking up stones, other sorts of things, and throwing them and scaring the other, vicious predators away. Think about the advantages this would give them, right? So, if anything, the birth of humanity really is beginning in the Australopith line, right? And not they're writing Shakespeare, but the capacity for empathy. Now, we're going to be looking at a film next week as we get more down into the actual mental, the neurological hardware on that. But I want you to consider that these just aren't these dumb chimps. All right. Now, next, to conclude, there's a couple of reading things we need to sort of get started on. And the first is the story of the human body. Now's the time that we have to start reading it. And what I'd like you to do for your homework for this weekend, up until we meet next Monday or Tuesday, depending on which school you're at, is read the introduction of the story of the human body. And that introduction is called What Are Humans Adapted For? It's a very short piece. Okay? And I want you to think about this question. And you'll understand the question once you read the book. How did that monkey make it? Just think about it. How did that monkey make it? Primary question. All right. Now, next, there's also good information, too, in chapter 17 of our large evolution text, okay? One written by Zimmer. And the information I want you to read in there begins on page 633 and ends on page 649. And that does concern just strictly Australopithecine evolution. And that's really what our sort of task is right now. We're going to get through Australopithecine evolution, the radiation, and the transformations into our genus by the end of next Thursday. All right, so again, any questions, hit me up with them by email. I'll be here for you. Take care.